The law of unintended consequences. The third common way in which success turns to failure is through the unintended consequences of well-intentioned actions. Here there is simple miscalculation based on failure to understand how systems operate. Dietrich Dorner, professor of psychology at Germany's University of Bamberg, has written a fascinating book titled The Logic of Failure, which explores why intelligent people and institutions can proceed with care and goodwill and yet often produce disastrous results. He says that the problem lies in our patterns of thought, which are linear and take one thing at a time, thinking in terms of cause and effect. Because we don't think in terms of systems and their interrelationships, we miss the big picture, pile small error on small error, and end up with spectacularly unintended and often tragic consequences. Dorner's ideas derive from systems thinking and clearly relate to ideas that we explored in relation to quantum mechanics in Chapter 6 and chaos and complexity in Chapter 9. Dorner gives many examples of disasters. Why did the well-qualified engineers who planned the Aswan Dam, and whose simple aim was to bring cheap electricity to Egypt, not realize that the annual floods that they would stop had kept the Nile Valley rich and fertile for millennia? Why do planners of health programs in poor countries not take into account that increasing the numbers alive will also increase demand for food, and that without extra food production, improved health care will just lead to malnutrition and sometimes famine? Why did the operators of reactor number 4 of the atomic energy plant at Chernobyl, who had just won a safety award, end up with the ghastly explosion of April 26, 1986? On a less horrific scale, what about the mayor and city council who dealt with traffic congestion and air pollution in a city by installing speed bumps and a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit? What could go wrong here? Quite a lot. The cars had to travel in second gear, so they were noisier and produced more exhaust. Shopping trips took longer, and the number of cars in the city center actually increased. But that was self-correcting. After a while, fewer people shopped downtown, preferring the big new mall on the edge of a neighboring town. That solved the noise and pollution problems, but led to many shops in the city closing. Tax revenues plummeted. Taxes had to be raised on the remaining businesses, which just reinforced the cycle of decline. All caused by a few speed bumps in a noble cause. The theory of the second best. The example of the speed bumps links nicely to a theory beloved of economists, and especially those in the area of public policy. This is the theory of the second best, which says that reaching an optimal outcome in individual markets may lead to a suboptimal overall outcome. For example, if free markets led to an optimal position in all individual product markets, but left an economy with 40% unemployment, this would not really be optimal. The theory therefore says that instead of seeking optimality in each part of the economy, we should go for the best overall solution, which may imply second-best solutions in individual markets. Stripped of economists' usual obsession with equilibrium and optimality, two very elusive goals, the theory of the second best is really just saying that the economy is a system, and that actions in one area may have unintended consequences in another. It is a useful idea because it tells us that we may have to compromise, and that pursuit of one objective may be myopic. Speed bumps must not be thought of purely in terms of their own objectives. Incidentally, although the law of unintended consequences focuses on unfortunate outcomes, there are clearly positive unintended consequences, such as Adam Smith's invisible hand. He wrote, "Every individual necessarily labors to render the annual revenue of the society as great as he can. He generally, indeed, neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he is promoting it. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectively than when he really intends to promote it. System dynamics. J. Forrester of MIT was a computer pioneer who developed system dynamics in the 1960s and 1970s, known by other practitioners as systems thinking, and developed since about 1950. Forrester was one of the first to call attention to the unintended consequences of well-intentioned policies on issues such as urban decay or the environment. Typically, he said, the policies attacked the symptoms of the problems, alleviating the symptoms but often exacerbating the fundamental problems that were systems rather than discrete issues. Systems thinking has much in common with the concepts of chaos and complexity. The intention in all cases is to identify the underlying system that operates in order to find long-term solutions rather than short-term palliatives. Avoiding unintended consequences. Dietrich Dorner suggests the following prescriptions. 1. Set clear, explicit, positive, and multiple goals. If possible, we should formulate concrete goals. If we can't, muddling through is better than inaction. 2. Pursue several goals at once. If you focus on one goal alone, you will produce all kinds of unintended byproducts. You may object that to pursue several goals at once may bring conflicts between the goals. This is true. But the conflict is constructive because it forces us to consider the relative priorities and trade-offs implicit in the goals. For example, would we rather have speed bumps and a clean, quiet, pollution-free city center, or a thriving retail and business center at the expense of some congestion and exhaust fumes? Can we think of any realistic way of having most of our cake and also eating most of it? We can't always realize all our goals at once because the goals may partly conflict with each other. We must be prepared to compromise. We should always have a clear set of priorities, but be willing to change them if it's clear that they'll lead to results we don't really want. 3. Construct hypotheses and test them. If we do X, it will result in A, B, and C. If we like A, B, and C, we may try out X. If we don't have the expected result, at least we have more data. Wrong hypotheses can be corrected. 4. Use analogies to go from what you know to what you don't. 5. Think of everything as a system and try to identify all the important system elements. Form a model of the system. You can start with a single element, but then think of its context. In the pool example, you could start with the fish. A fish breathes, it eats, it excretes. It needs oxygen. What happens to the waste? We can begin to see how everything in the system fits together. 6. Think about problems you don't have at the moment, but which may emerge as side effects of your actions. Think about what may happen over time. Imagine potential pitfalls. 7. Don't hastily ascribe everything that happens to one central cause. This is rarely the case. And 8. Construct simulations. By playing games with many variables affecting the system, you'll learn how systems work and be able to make mistakes with no real-life penalties. One thing that Dorner does not say, but that seems apparent to me, is that ultimately The most effective antidote to unintended consequences is human creativity and adaptability. Unintended consequences arise because we live in non-linear systems and because we make changes, because we do things. We are restless, just like nature, just like evolution. Each action generates new instabilities, and will always do so. Unintended consequences can never be eliminated. We should be aware that they will arise. We should be ready to notice them before they have done too much harm, and we should be creative in correcting them and aware that the corrections will lead to further unintended consequences, which will require further correction. How to perpetuate success. Dietrich Dorner's model and examples are useful for those in charge of a successful business. They help us to think about what could go wrong. Consider this in 3 ways. 1. What happens if something in the business system changes unilaterally? 2. What new actions that we've taken in the current business system could have had unintended consequences? And 3. How do we plan new initiatives that will be as successful as current ones and that won't have unintended consequences? Let's now take a look at these 3 ways in more detail. What happens if something in the business system changes unilaterally? A successful system can only turn into an unsuccessful system, from our point of view, if one of 2 things happens. Either we do something differently, or something else in the system changes to our disadvantage. Therefore, if we're doing the same as ever, and things start to go wrong, it must be because of a change, or changes, in other elements of the business system. So, start by asking, what has changed? Have the customers changed what they want? Is a competitor gaining market share? And if so, why? Is the technology or the business definitions shifting? And has everyone else found a way of cutting their costs while ours remain as they were? Construct several hypotheses, both complementary and competing. Remember that there's unlikely to be one simple cause. Even if there is, it will have second and third order effects that must be traced. Test and refine the hypotheses until there's a reasonable chance they're right. Then, act to restore your advantage. If this doesn't work, go through the whole cycle again. What new actions that we've taken in the current business system could have had unintended consequences? What are we doing differently? If you know the answer, fine. If not, ask other people. Introspection will not be accurate or complete. Map out all elements of the business system, including but not necessarily confined to your customers, including any important different types of customer, suppliers, distributors, other collaborators, colleagues, core structures, technologies, regulators, and so on. Imagine all possible impacts that the changes may have had on each part of the system, and the consequential results, particularly bad results, that might have arisen. Construct and test hypotheses. Be suspicious of pat solutions involving just one variable. For the system to have changed fundamentally, several aspects of the system are likely to have shifted. Then, act. And if it doesn't restore the system to your advantage, go through the cycle again. How do we plan new initiatives that will be as successful as current ones and that won't have unintended consequences? Here we need to interject skepticism from outside the Dorner model. The chances are that new initiatives won't be as successful as existing ones. The only reasonable basis for thinking that they might be as successful is if they use the same formulae, skills, competencies, technologies, and any other key attribute, such as a fantastic proprietary client base, that drives the success of the existing business. But let us assume this is true. What then? Well, the Dorner model is good for thinking about where there might be unintended consequences. In particular, 1. What unintended consequences could the new business have on the existing one? Think through all elements of the system and their relationships to each other. 2. What other unintended consequences could entry to the new business have? Again, trace through all components of the new business system. And 3, if there do turn out to be negative consequences, construct hypotheses and test them, as discussed previously, until you have an answer that works. Summary. Sustainable success is built on a virtuous cycle, but success often contains the seeds of its own destruction. A virtuous cycle can turn into a vicious cycle if success changes the conditions that led to success in the first place. This is the paradox of enrichment. Riches corrode the will to please customers. Successful firms become flabby and complex. Enter greed, complacency, or arrogance. Exit success. Even without such an ethical failure, 2 other dangers lurk: entropy and unintended consequences. Like everything else, the elements of business, that is, ideas, technologies, individuals, teams, and corporations, are subject to entropy. Without maintenance and renewal, all these elements will wind down. Business conditions are always becoming more stringent. Everything is always becoming something else. Entropy is hardest on yesterday's winners. Success has to be reinvented, yet past success makes future success difficult. Firms that have extracted more value than they have added will be especially vulnerable. Their pool of collaborators will dry up. Unintended consequences may also intervene. Business is a system of interrelated components. Change in any one component may go unnoticed, yet break the spell of success. We need to anticipate unexpected consequences. When they arrive anyway, we must model their causes carefully. Ultimately, sustaining success is a moral issue. Although we might wish it were otherwise, business is the art of pleasing the customers we choose, with more flair, economy, and style than anyone else. This is a hard calling. Those who are successful have great technical advantages, but equally great attitudinal disadvantages. Can they display the greatest flair, economy, and style when conditions and competitors change? Can success sustain superior service? Can success sustain simplicity? Can success keep focus? Can success keep lean? Experience replies, sometimes, not often, not forever, not without the perpetual reinvention and delivery of superior value. Action implications. 1. Sustain success by creating new value every day. 2. Keep yourself and your firm humble, service-oriented, focused, lean, and hungry. Eschew corporate complexity. Root out arrogance, greed, and complacency. 3. Expect and correct unexpected consequences. Learn to anticipate and deal with them. Think of business as a system whose components are always shifting, where a major shift in just one component can change the entire system, where there will always be unintended consequences, and where continual monitoring, adjustment, and creativity must be deployed to detect and overcome them. Part 3, Concluding Note. One common theme of Part 3, shared with Parts 1 and 2, is the wonkiness of the world. We expect and search out linear relationships and rejoice when we find them, but we tend to ignore the most frequent nonlinear relationships because they are inconvenient and perplexing. Yet, the message of Part 3 is that nonlinear relationships can be understood and be extremely useful. The concept of chaos is very helpful because it tells us the importance of initial conditions. Markets, relationships, and corporations evolve as they do because of early chance events and quickly get frozen into the patterns formed at the outset. Chaos also tells us about the fractal nature of business, which is an insight that, properly understood, can save a great deal of trouble. Complexity theory demonstrates how systems emerge and organize themselves into something different from their component parts, a phenomenon at once awesome, constructive, and destructive. The 80-20 principle is also a fantastically useful power law, showing that a particular sort of wonkiness is deeply ingrained in the universe and enabling us, almost infallibly, to extract more from less. The nonlinear, jerky nature of market growth and technological change is also something that, when appreciated, can help to separate the fad from the trend, tell us whether we can drive a new product or business across its tipping point, and enable us to spot what may become a mega success. Insight into the nature of networks and electronic business can also tell us when there is scope to create enormous new value, and how to be on the right side of the extremely asymmetrical capture of value created. Finally, the paradox of enrichment, the law of entropy, and the law of unintended consequences all highlight the systemic pitfalls of success and how to sustain success by systematic avoidance of the pitfalls. A second common theme of Part 3 is the tension between laissez-faire and intervention. In nonlinear systems, we deal with some extremely powerful natural forces. We have seen many different kinds of invisible hands at work, sometimes producing extremely pleasing results, and sometimes infuriatingly defeating our best-laid plans. As with the forces of biology and physics, however, we must strike a balance between the opposite errors of automatically accepting the power laws on the one hand and ignoring them on the other. The laws are there, and we had better take note. But might is not right. What is not what should be. Nature is not infallible or inherently virtuous, and neither are markets, high-growth phenomena, successful corporations, or self-organization. Progress requires us to channel nature and its forces, to use them for our own ends, and to intervene when they threaten civilization and its fruits. Part 3's third and final theme is that business, and the forces operating within and around it, are not essentially different from the rest of life, the universe, and everything. All the power laws apply to life generally. They apply to business because business is part of life. Hence, we can use the insights gathered beyond the walls of commerce. But it also follows that the view of business as a separate terrain, an enclave with its own conventions and laws, a mysterious no-go area for the rest of society, a quasi-medieval guild with its own governance, a field of study that requires its own schools, a landscape that can safely ignore more general insights on how to live a happy and fulfilled life and behave responsibly to others, is deeply flawed. Business is an intrinsic part of the messy reality governed by non-linear forces. We have had the boundaryless corporation and the boundaryless market. Now it is time for boundaryless business, boundaryless knowledge, boundaryless technology. for business and science and technology naked before humanity and society, for a view of how things work and how we can be successful that applies equally to business and all other parts of life.